How's it going, Kittanning? Welcome back to the Greatest City in the World podcast. I'm here for Mental Health Monday, 4 in a row. This is becoming a thing now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we have a lot of momentum, a lot of things that need to be addressed.
Yeah, and the comments that we get are just so helpful. So as you guys are listening today, if you have something that piques your interest or you have like a thought or a topic, we would love to hear from you. So just be thinking about that as you're listening, and don't be afraid to stop the video, type in the comment, and then continue on. So we're going to go through another viewer submission today, but we thought maybe valuable today to kind of go back to what it means to calibrate the body, because even as you're taking in this information, if you've had a crazy day or a crazy week or a crazy 2 years like everyone else has,
yes,
it would be helpful just to take a step back. What does it mean to calibrate our bodies? And then you'll actually be able to take in the information we talk about today in a greater way.
In a much greater way.
Yeah.
Right. So let's go back to what it means to calibrate the body. What we want to be in is a parasympathetic state, which quickly, easy way to remember it, rest and digest. All right. And so God has given us the ability to exert influence over two major mechanisms in our bodies that we're functioning under when we're under sympathetic autonomic, which is fight or flight.
Yeah.
All right. So those two indicators that we see on functional MRIs, by the way, are that instead of the oxygen going to the diaphragm so that the body can avail itself of what it needs to in all the major organ groups and all of our muscular structure and everything, right, to function the way it needs to be, which is homeostasis, we have to have the oxygen to the diaphragm and not concentrated in the lungs for a power strike, all right? So as I indicated earlier, I believe at some point, we talked about how breathing is something that many, many people are knowing about and hearing about. And again, it's excellent to know the what, but we've got to know the how, right? And we need to know the why. The why is so important so that we can use it when we're feeling like we're in a state of fight or flight.
Yeah.
Even if we're not feeling like we're in a state of fight or flight, it's important to be calibrating, meaning we're going to encourage our bodies to be in the parasympathetic, in the rest and digest on a regular basis, just like we're doing push-ups, sit-ups, whatever to train our bodies. This is a key component for us to be in a state of health baseline.
Yeah.
So
do you find that the longer that you've done this, like, do you find yourself like naturally when you're in a stressful situation that you'll start to breathe deeply?
Yes.
Or breathe with your belly instead?
Yes. And
okay.
I hear a lot of my participants say the same thing. We
Yeah.
don't want to get stuck in it though, because it tends to be like a pressure release valve.
Yeah.
And then we don't go on to the mind and emotion.
Right.
All right. But today, let's just get the importance of body in there.
Sure.
So that we can start having this be part of a regular beginning.
Yeah.
Before we go into the other stuff.
Yeah. So what do
No?
do we do?
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let's try it.
I'm sorry, I just acted Spanish on you. I'm like, no, and then yes. So, all right. Breathing to the diaphragm.
Yeah.
Put your hands on the bellies and make it rise and fall by bringing your breath past the lungs visually in your imagery, past the lungs into the stomach, into the diaphragm. And if you have trouble doing that, put your hand on your chest area and make sure the diaphragm area is rising first. So what we're doing is we're giving the body a proper exchange of oxygen and CO2. And when that proper exchange doesn't get a chance to happen, that's the beginning of the body signaling itself that it needs to be out of a state of rest and digest. It's like scuba divers who come up too fast and get the bends. Do you know that reference?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you guys out there know that reference? And it's a very good reference actually, because I was speaking with a participant and mentioned this exchange, and he said, "Oh, like scuba diving," and I said yes, and I had found the example before. So there are lots and lots of things. I mention this because there's lots of things out there. If you start paying attention, you're going to start seeing how this really applies just walking around.
Yeah, there's a lot of things, like you talk about meditation and stuff, like that is like, that's the new thing. Like there's so many books on meditation and how to properly do it and all that stuff, and so much of that practice is proper breathing techniques and self-awareness, and all these things are like nuggets of truth that are part of this kind of greater whole of what we're talking about. So it's pretty cool as you learn these things. It's like I send you articles all the time because I'll be like, I'll send an article, be like, oh my gosh, look at this. They're like, they have a piece of it, but it, you know, here's X, Y, and Z of like why it's not fully complete.
Right.
And so we're hoping that this would be, not that we are like the arbiters of all the answers of life.
No, it's just like the ABC 1, 2, 3, do, re, mi. It's the baseline to make everything else out there more effective, creative, and whole.
Yeah. And we just really believe this blending of all the things that are being revealed right now of how creation works and the knowledge of the truth of God. And when you bring those two things together, it's just really, it's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, and that's where it's at.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean it doesn't have value. It doesn't mean that along your way of however this is beneficial for you isn't right where you're supposed to be in learning, discovering, and doing it.
Yeah.
It's not a pressure campaign in any way, shape, or form. Lord knows that would have turned me around and made me run right out the door. So
So we got our deep breathing. Hopefully you at home are doing the same thing. Prepare your body. And then the other one is the vision. So what's your exercise for that?
So the exercise for that, I'm not sure what angle I am, but hopefully you can see that the index fingers need to be nose height, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to incorporate the peripheral vision muscles.
I feel like I better back up.
Okay. Okay. Boom.
I'm gonna get hit.
This is great. So yes. So we do this, all right, because when we are in fight or flight, our vision is hooded in an attempt to be certain that either something coming at us, we can fight and we're not going to get distracted by things around us, or we can find the quickest means of egress, again, without getting distracted. All right. So we want to get our vision out of that. Some people will experience tunnel vision. So that's a very common walking around out there kind of example of this.
Right.
All right. Yeah. And migraines are a huge component of it as well. So fingers in front, index finger straight up. Keep the center of your vision wherever you're looking that opens up first. Yeah, I'm going to bring these back.
Just keep your eyes in the middle where you started, right?
Yes, where you started. It's helpful to wiggle your fingers sometimes so that you can get that full range of vision opening up.
So you kind of watching your peripherals, the fingers go out, but keep your focus in front.
Keep the focus in front so that you have a panoramic vision.
Yeah.
Vision field. And then to check it, see what you can see on your right, see what you can see on your left with past your finger range. Because it's not just a check, it's actually an expansion.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah. It's so funny. There was this lady, she used to come to church, and she talked about how she would get so angry with her husband. Like we were doing, like she wanted counseling. And so, which by the way, I'm the wrong person to come to for that. But she told me the story on how her husband, she would get so mad at him. She'd be like, I lose control of myself, and I literally see red. And then when we were talking about this later on, I was like, that's what she had. She had like this tunnel vision, like she was just going to kill this guy.
And we literally see red. I say we because I used to literally see red as well.
Yeah.
It's those vein contractions in the back of the eye of what's happening, and it surges so quickly because the blood rush is surging so quickly to where it needs to go that we literally see red. And that's the other thing, guys. You're going to hear all kinds of phrasing out there that we draw from and use colloquially that are in reference to what we're talking about, like seeing red.
Yeah. And now you're like, wow, okay, that's what that means, and that's why that's actually true and a thing.
And now I can do something about it.
Absolutely. All right, so we may not take that much time to go through those each time, but
well, we just
want to
them.
like introduce those things because they're incredibly important, and so
Right.
many things on mental health leave out the body, and for us to not address it would be a disservice to everyone.
Big time.
Yeah.
And so the body-mind connection is being talked about a lot, but how emotion can take the body right back is not.
Yeah.
So again, those are building blocks that I hope we'll be able to move through and cover. We agreed, right, that we'll start with the body, but not that full explanation every time. That's
Sure.
something that hopefully you can put a link or something
Yeah.
to drop in there, and then that way we can just like start and reference it and then start.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So into our comment for the day. This is from Summer on YouTube. I thought it was really good, and it was in relation when we were talking about COVID and kind of how that's played with all of our mental health and taken up so much of our mind space. That's where this comment's coming from, but I think there's a much bigger implication to it. So I'm just going to read it and then we'll talk through it.
Okay.
So it says, I feel like one's ability to escape the onset of peer pressure from another because their belief differs from our belief or the decision can be challenging. We are forced, encouraged, or ridiculed by employers, coworkers, family, and friends to feel obligated to what we are reluctant in doing so that others felt safe. And, I don't want to get into like a big political discussion about COVID, and that's not why we're here. But as I read that comment, I was just like, man, that is obviously really pertinent over the last couple of years, and in a good way, right? Because we don't want to offend. I think people.
No.
There has been a lot of grace in the system, especially at the beginning of the pandemic,
Yeah.
where we were just like, man, we just want to like care for other people. And as it's dragged on, obviously those warm and fuzzies have all. There's none of that left
No,
at
no.
all.
But we've gone deeper and deeper into feeling attacked,
Right, yeah.
And not just people, not any one side or any one belief, just because it's been attached, like you were talking about what's wrong with Andy.
Yeah.
Because it's been so there. So wherever we turn, it's so there.
Right. Yeah, and for me, it was literally like, it was almost like a spiritual, it was literally attached to me. And when that thing was gone, it was just like, I'm back. I felt like I was a new person again.
Yeah.
And, but then I got to thinking about that comment. I was like, okay, I've known a lot of people in my life who it doesn't feel to me like they can ever live their actual life that they've been called to live because they're so concerned about other people's opinions, or, they don't want to disappoint their mom and dad or grandma that hasn't been around for 20 years. And it's like, they're still making decisions based off of that, out of what I think is a good intention in their heart.
I would think so too.
But it's like you can almost, it's like a palpable feeling. You can just feel that like it's dragging them back from holding them back from what they have for what God has for them.
I'm like suffocating over here as I'm listening to the description.
Well, that's what I thought about as I was reading that. I was just like, wow, that's a real big problem.
Right.
So where does that those feelings, that kind of like obligation to another person, which, by the way, it's good to live for other people, to serve in their best interests, but like there's a line where that becomes
it has to be an also, right? And so two things as I was listening to you describe it. One, the bullying component that we talked about last week, because we sure don't experience that in school and then grow out of it. Right? We still have that same kind of make me feel okay, make me feel better kind of functioning from some people out there, right? And not some people as some people's kids, just general population, some people. And then some people who have been so accustomed to needing to stop the sensation of conflict that they just do whatever they've known that ceases that feeling the quickest way they know how.
Yeah.
And it comes back to this. I feel like a broken record, but I'm going to try to make sure that there's relevancy within this broken record of it all comes back to body, mind, emotion. Because when people are living for, if you will, because they don't want to disappoint, and it is well-intentioned, it's still a reactive state. It's something that says, okay, I'm experiencing this, so in this reactive fight or flight state, my procedure memory says, if I do this, then it will relieve the sensation. It's the pressure release valve, but not going about it through a chosen action like we did at the beginning, through a chosen action of the body. So because it is all so interdependent, when they acquiesce to whatever it is that they're feeling like they need to, then that tension goes down and they feel better for a while.
Right.
And it gets stuck in a toxic stress loop, right? And then, but then implosion or explosion are the two extremes of being physically in that toxic stress loop, which then very well may mean they're the bully on the other side, right? In some other situation.
Okay.
Yeah. So these things are not exclusive, one and done. It's this and that's all.
Yeah.
It's...
I'm thinking, I'm trying to put it in like a practical scenario that'll make sense to me and hopefully everybody else. Okay. So I'll give you this. So let's say you have a parent who they're hypercritical every time their child makes any kind of decision from the time that they're 3 years old. They're always like kind of pushing them to do things mom's way or dad's way or whoever it might be. And so then as we get older, we are like trying to avoid the blow up that's going to happen when I make a decision for myself. And so every time I'm going to make a decision, I think about, well, what would mom think of that? And so then basically mom is still making my decisions for me even when she's not there.
Yes. And may not even be a conscious thought.
Right. Yeah. And so like then that is the pressure release valve, right? Saying, okay, well, I'll just do whatever she would want me to do. But then that just builds up pressure over time. Correct. Where there's either going to be like one of two things happen. There'll be a big blow up and you'll lose the relationship entirely. Or it'll be like it'll never be resolved. And someday when mom dies, you'll carry that with you forever.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, that's both of those sound absolutely horrifying to me.
Yeah.
I guess the third option would be like, I'll just completely disconnect and like go off and find some other escapism, which might be alcohol or drugs or whatever else might be.
Right.
So.
And when I say this all interrelates and goes together, so even when we're trying to have a conversation, like perhaps Summer was talking about, because it sounded like she had experience with people that she cares about or situations that she cares about. And so when we don't have that prefrontal cortex available to us that we do when we're in rest and digest, it's very difficult to identify and communicate our position in the way that we not in the way that we intend, in the way that it can be carried on caring, right? On saying, I really want to move through this with you, rather than it be a...
Yeah, because it's easier if we don't care about the other person.
Right, way easier.
We can dismiss
easier.
It, but when it is, and it almost always is, those close... That's where we can be hurt the most because of the closeness.
Right. Because we care and we want to protect that relationship. But again, that functioning, we try to outrun it in whatever form it takes, but we can't truly ever outrun it.
Yeah. So, like, if there's someone out there, like, right now, so how would they recognize that is indeed what they're doing, and then how do they move forward?
They feel like they're suffocating, like I was experiencing when I was listening. I mean, because truly the breath starts moving up here, and you're going, but really just being miserable, right? The kinds of things when our selves will ask to be heard, and the more they ask, eat. I don't want to sound like I'm not. I don't have many personalities, right? But the self, the soul, right, who we are created to be, will keep poking and say, you didn't really want to do that. Or, remember that daydream you were having and you were feeling like, wow, wouldn't that be great? Oh, but it's impossible. Those kinds of experiences, I don't think really need to be described in that if we know we're not living for who we were created to be, we know we're not living for who we were created to be.
Yeah.
It's, we know when we're suppressing our own selves.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think it's I would say you're not alone.
Oh, big time.
Because I think every single one of us, like, this is one of those universal things that we can very easily get caught up in. And I think the last 2 years has especially, it's created an environment where that can just run rampant in our own lives and in our families. And we can very quickly, like, I mean, it can get crazy fast.
Right. Well, and estrangement, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we have all these factions, all this tribalism, right? We have all these tribes out there, which are, again, we want a sense of belonging, but that's not supposed to be exclusive. It's supposed to bring us through ascension to who we were created to be, not lock us down into only being able to hang with people who are just like us. And because that's where people are finding safety and security, that's what's happening.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and it's really easy once you get to that point. Like, tribalism goes to a whole, like, it can go to a really ugly end because ultimately you can look at the other person as if they're not even human.
Right.
And we forget, like, we lose all empathy because we're so caught up in just, like, in winning for the sake of, like, easing my mind that I will do anything to get to that end, which can sometimes lead to, like, death and bloodshed at its most extreme.
Right. When I talk about the two extremes of implosion or explosion is murder and implosion is suicide.
Yeah. Okay. So and that's obviously not an end any of us, I don't think, desire.
No, and we don't need to. We so don't need to live where those things are even, like, so common. Ugh, I hate to use that term.
They are, though.
But so common.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're feeling that way, you're in that place, you have a relationship like that where you feel suffocated, you're like, gosh, I'm thinking so many examples now too. Like, you have a coworker that every time you're around them, you're, like, suffocated by them. You're in a relationship where it's like, you might be abusive relationship, whether it's physical, mental, emotional abuse, and you're, like, in that spot, suffocated all the time. What do you do? Like, how do you even begin to move forward?
Well, again, we go back to the body. When you have time by yourself, with yourself, and that's the beauty of this as well, because meditation and a lot of other very good practices out there require that we remove ourselves to be able to avail of ourselves of the benefit. Calibrating the body, you can just do that walking around. So that doesn't have to be done when you have a minute to yourself. But when you have a minute to yourself to identify prefrontal cortex thoughts, okay, because the prefrontal cortex is the one that long-term plans, takes in information, processes it to then prioritize. So that's going to be the place that really lets you know who and how and what you want to be in terms of what this situation is. All right. And so that's the part that I encourage if there's time alone. But in domestic violence situations, there's not time alone. It's a constant. All right. So I separate that a little bit, because when we're talking about these things, they're all on a continuum. A few minor kinds of things, like not wanting to have an in-depth discussion at work. That's on the very low end of the continuum, right?
Right.
And so you can identify how you want to communicate to the other person your position without it being a big deal. We can get to that relatively easily. But when we're talking about really dangerous situations like domestic violence, when we're talking about very ingrained ways of pattern and thinking because of trauma, all of these piecing outs require much more than me saying, do this. All right. So I want to clarify that component.
Well, and all the situations are so unique, right? And so they're all going to have. Yes,
the details are unique. But the bottom line is the same.
So I think that's what I was getting to, is like all these, like, we can't. Well, I guess you could put in the situation if you wanted us to kind of parse out details. That would actually be helpful.
That would be great.
But if, like, I think the point is we have to calibrate the body
That's first.
just to even be able to turn on the brain.
Correct.
To be able to think through and make proper decisions moving forward.
Correct. To turn on the human brain, because the reptilian brain, it's up, downstairs to upstairs, kind of.
And if you never, well, I use like the executive functioning, right? Because it's like you're allowing the CEO of your brain to actually make the decisions instead of just reacting to everything around.
Right. You're responding.
Yeah, responding instead of reacting. And so you have to get to that point where you can actually sit down and do that, because you'll never be able to escape it.
No.
Otherwise, you'll just keep searching for the next pressure valve. Like, how can I release this? How can I release this? How can I release this?
Right.
But if you can finally calibrate, and then you can begin to actually think about it clear-headed. I mean, this is how I operate here.
Okay.
I'll get pad and paper at home. If I have a decision or whatever, I'll start to write out my thoughts on it. I'll write pros and cons, those kinds of things, and you can actually have that internal discussion.
Yes.
Once you can calibrate the body.
Right. And again, that's a very important component. Once you can calibrate the body, then doing that component, don't forget about emotion. Checking in how, not just what makes the most sense, right? What makes the most sense in terms of how the fruits of the Spirit, a way of being, right, are indicating to you whether or not you are indeed being true to you, or whether or not you're doing something to appease someone else.
Yeah. And I'll find a lot of times when I kind of go through that myself, I get my body right, and then I'm checking my emotions and my mindset about the whole thing, and it's like I find out that the other person wasn't actually the problem at all.
That's 9 out of 10, by the way. But
that my thoughts about them, my thoughts about them, and the way that I was perceiving their treatment of me isn't actually a reality.
Right.
And then I can then that's the dream scenario, because it's also a nightmare for some of us, because then we're like, oh, I can't blame anyone else anymore. Darn it. But when I realize that, then it's like it's a dream scenario because I have the ability to fix me.
And that's it.
Yeah. And I should say I have the ability to fix me with God's help.
Correct.
And he's given us that ability to be able to walk forward. And so if I can just get to that place of being able to sit down, I stop all my internal self-talk about how I'm being great injustice. And that's not to poo-poo anybody's actual injustice, because there really is that.
No, there's true.
But most of the time in my life, it's like my perception of it is wrong, and I'm just allowing these thoughts to run rampant and destroy me.
Yes. And that's why I say 9 out of 10, and not just you, right?
Yeah.
All of us, 9 out of 10. I mean, way back in the day when I first really started getting a better awareness, I finally realized, I'm like, when there's something wrong with everybody else, it's time to take a hard look in the mirror, right? And so that was, again, I think that's probably a common saying, and that's a seedling of what all of this is. Because if we are reacting and we're seeing everybody else through the lens of who we are, right? That's how we see things. We see things through the lens of who we are, not how they are.
Right.
Most of the time. There are true injustices, as it was important that you mention. Right?
I was just thinking about, I remember this marriage counseling thing. I think it was in Love and Respect, actually, the book. And he starts these conversations as they're trying to rebuild marriages and things. And it's like, look, obviously you guys liked each other at one point.
Right.
Do you believe that this is still a good-natured woman? Do you still believe this is a good-natured man? Do you believe that they're actively out to harm you every day? And it's like, just even asking those questions about other people when we have those kind of perceived harms in our own life, it then breaks down the barrier. Because even the overbearing parent, the overbearing parent's probably that way because of some kind of brokenness in them. And they're not actually trying to harm you. They're trying to help you.
Right. Again, same deal. Most of the time, 99.9% of the time, everybody's doing the best that they know how to.
Right.
And so those parents that are hypercritical are probably wanting to make sure you remain safe, or wanting to make sure you get out of their house. No. Wanting to make sure that you have whatever it is on their heart to make sure you have.
Yeah.
Right? So it's most of the time because we're doing the best we know how to do.
Yeah, and the actions of how they're playing that out could be 100% wrong.
Correct.
And the motive behind it still actually be good.
Right.
And so it's important to kind of not just attach injustices towards us to that person as a whole. Like, I don't know how to word that.
Well, it takes some time, right? First, we have to be able to process the emotion that comes kicking up whenever not only that person but anybody who reminds us of that person, which again is why we're running around in hot messes, because we have all this unprocessed emotion that when we encounter something that five senses like out there, it throws us right back to that initial shaping of it being a fight or flight reaction. And so it's really, being able to get to the place where energy and motion can be released as an indicator for what it means and identifying what it means, then we can get to the component of healing and forgiveness. But we can't jump straight there. If we try to jump straight there, it's a losing game.
Yeah, it's just like day to day building blocks, get these calibrations right.
Yes.
Work on you as much as is possible. And then we could talk about this in a future episode because I know it's a bigger topic than this, but when we get right, we actually have this impact on the environment around us that is way beyond what we think is actually possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
And that's right. So interdependency.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know. Do you have anything else to add to this?
No, not today.
I think this is a good discussion. I think there's a couple of future ideas that I'm thinking just as we're talking is number one, that environmental thing I think is really, it's really just cool. It's just like a neat bit of science that is, it's inspiring to me at least.
Right.
Inspires change in my own life. And then like, what if I keep changing, but they never change? Then what? And that's bigger than today too, probably. But
it is. But let me just throw a tidbit out there. So you come back, it won't matter, and that's the real beauty, right? Not that they no longer matter, but that thing that they don't change won't matter because you will be in a place of being able to process through and come to your own understanding and conclusion of who you want to be in that situation, not the other person.
So good.
Yes. And then 9 out of 10, they start coming along.
That's right. So maybe that'll whet your appetite for the next episode, or some of you will answer put some comments down there, and it will inspire us for our next episode here for next Monday.
You know what? Excuse me. I'm sorry. I do want to mention that as we're calibrating body, see what kind of thoughts come in that are kind of novel thoughts or kind of like, oh, I never quite realized that before. And start jotting those down or, making a note in your phone, whatever it is, and start getting an awareness of that. And these will be indeed the building blocks.
Amen.
Okay.
All right. Well, bless you guys. Thanks for checking in with us today on Monday.
Yes.
And we'll see you 7 days from now. Yep. Same time, same place.
Mental Health Monday.